Hello, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Layron with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. We're going to continue with the DM Dungeon Master setup and tips. This episode's going to be a little different in the fact that I'm going to kind of go off the rails and take a look at building some content that's going to enhance the play. So when you buy a module or a pre-planned adventure that's already set up for you, there's probably very minimal prep that you need to do other than reading through and kind of getting familiar with the content. However, if you are running something that's pretty run-of-the-mill that everyone knows about and such, it's kind of nice to enhance that experience, also based on your experience and what you want to bring to the table. But essentially, I'm going to bring in some artwork and some additional maps to enhance the gameplay and also to make it more interesting and fun to run. And some of your players may have already ran through this with their own characters and with a different GM, so I want to make the experience kind of unique, and I don't want to necessarily keep it, status quo or the same. So what I'm doing now is I'm in Canva, which is the online application that I'm using. This runs about $100 a year, 120 or something like that. But I generated these two wolves here from the Starry AI app, which is a free or paid application that essentially you just give it some keywords and it will generate some art for you. So what I told it to do is I wanted two wolves with chains in a cave, and that's basically what I got out of that prompt. I also added a little bit of blood in here to kind of make it look a little bit more gory because they're kind of fighting over food right now. This is kind of the theme I wanted to. So when I present this photo to the players, it'll look kind of gruesome and scary. Even though these are just typically wolves, I mean, they don't have to be just generic, boring old wolves. You can really play this up. So right now I'm in the midst of adding some mist. So I'm looking at some of the presets that come with the pro version. So this is just a mask that has a little bit of a mist to it. I'm thinking that would kind of give this bottom part a little bit of a... Looks like there's moisture in the cave because there's actual river in there. So this would kind of lend itself to that. And then if you don't want it to cover too much, I can always go to the transparency tool and kind of turn it down or turn it up. I got to make sure I got the right thing selected. Yeah, so I can turn it down a little bit so it's not overwhelming. It's just very subtle. And that will give this a very bleak look. And then the page itself, or the actual photo itself, I can actually go in and edit the image, and I can turn the brightness down a little bit so it's not quite as happy looking, and then maybe turn the contrast just a touch so it has more of a darker appeal to it, and then maybe just a touch of saturation to kind of give it more color to stand out, and that kind of gives you the impression that it's a little bit darker in here than it's showing. And then you also kind of get a better mood from that, because I don't want it to be bright and cheerful. I kind of want it to be dark and scary. So let me play around with, see, that's too dark. I think just a touch of that darkness really kind of sets the tone, and it kind of highlights these wolves here. So they almost look like werewolves, but they're essentially tearing apart something, and they got food, and they're fighting over it, and they're chained up like they have in the adventure, because when you go into the actual module for Lost Mine, I'm going to go back to, again, my session 2 notes, which was where we left off. We had a combat with the guards outside of the cave. So that was something that we played through the last episode. We kind of got through some of it. I rewarded the party for defeating the goblins. They have their little goblin friend with them. I suggested that you can possibly turn the goblin into a player character if you want to recruit someone to play for a few sessions. And these are my notes that I have here. So what I'm going to end up doing is taking some of this work that I'm doing and adding it into Fantasy Grounds. So the story entry goes in where you have the player map, which is up here. That's going to come up in a second. So this is the player map. One of the first areas they come across is the kennel. And inside the kennel are some wolves. There's an encounter here with 2 wolves, or 3 actually. So you can get the impression that that this could be a deadly encounter for a low-level party, depending on on what you bring to the table. And it also describes a little bit. So it says the Cragmaws keep a kennel of foul-tempered wolves that they are training for battle. So when you go inside this cave, and the first area you go to, you can probably smell the dogs before you even get there. But just inside the cave mouth, a few uneven stone steps lead up to a small dank chamber on the east side of the passage. The cave narrows to a steep fissure at the far end and is filled with the stench of animals. Savage snarls and the sounds of rattling chains greet your ears when 3 wolves are chained up just inside of the opening. Each wolf's chain leads to an iron rod driven into the base of the stalagmite. So there's an encounter that comes up in this. It could be a potential fight there. And then they have there's a map here. It's kind of a crowded area, so it isn't a whole lot of room to maneuver in there once you're inside that cavern. It says that the 3 wolves are confined here. They can't reach targets that are standing on the stairs, so these 2 squares up here are safe, supposedly. So if you're standing there, you should be safe, or over here, or back. But it looks like if you come up any closer than that, you're going to get bit. So it says a character who tries to calm the animals with a DC wisdom check of animal handling will, on a success, allow the character to move through the room, and if the wolves are given some sort of food, the challenge rating will drop to 10. So that's a pretty interesting encounter. The fissure narrows at the east wall to a natural chimney that climbs to 30 feet in Area 8, which is kind of above this area. If you climb up there and make an athletics check, and if you succeed, you can move halfway up or down the shaft as desired. On a check 6 through 9, though, they neither gain or lose ground. If it's 5 or less, they fall and take 1d6 damage. So that's something that you'll have to be careful with. And then they did make an encounter for that. So basically, this is just a stat block. So if they lose their rolls and such, you can apply the damage and the knocked prone condition. So that's cool. So if the wolves are goaded by the enemies beyond their reach, they will drive themselves crazy, and it will give them a chance to yank out the iron rod that holds them to the floor. Each round that a character remains in sight, the wolves attempt a single DC strength check. On the first success, they loosen the rod, and on the second, the challenge drops to 10, and if they succeed, they yank the rod loose, bending it so the chains are freed. A goblin or a bugbear can use its action to release 1 wolf from its chain. So they're kind of accustomed to that. So if you have that little goblin with you, he might be able to go up and release one of them if he wanted to. But nonetheless, this is an interesting encounter, but it doesn't give you more than just that. There's no photo that I can tell, and it doesn't really embellish anything else other than the fact that you're going to be dealing with these dogs. And they're barking and making noises and everything else. And not to mention, there could be goblins up further in the cave. So you don't want to necessarily just run this as it is if you're kind of bored of it, or maybe you want to make it a little bit more interesting. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that you can take the encounter above and beyond what it was designed for and make it a little bit more unique. So this is kind of scary, actually. So if I'm going to do this, I could put it into Fantasy Grounds. I like to leave it as a PNG file, but that actually makes the file size a little big. So when I mean a little big, like as far as the actual megabytes. So if I don't compress it, it's going to be a little too big, and you're only going to share it for a few minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and render it as a JPEG. So if I share this right now, this is in the dimensions on this is 1290 by 1080 or something like that. So it's high def or whatever. So I can actually resize this if I wanted to make it a little easier on the import, or I can resize it later. So it just depends on what you want to do. I'm going to resize it in a different program. But I just wanted to let you know that this program will let you change the canvas size and everything else. So what I want to do is go to the, I'm going to share it, but actually just download it. and click on download, and then you can say compress for lower quality, so I can keep it as a JPEG, so it's scalable still, but you know, it's easier to stretch. But then again, I don't have to necessarily make it you know, a really low quality, like kind of fuzzy looking, or I could change it to a JPEG just to give it less, keep the quality at 100%, but they recommend that you scale it down to about 80% for Fantasy Grounds. And then for the dimensions, you can go down to, here's 96 by 540. That's pretty close to what they recommend. Usually they want between 1,000 and the other dimension would be like around 700. But I think this is a good way to scale it with, so I don't have to mess around with it in another program. So I can leave the quality at 100%, or I can bring it down to 80%. Because it's just an image that I'm going to be showing in the program. So I'll go ahead and hit download, and when that's downloading, it doesn't have a title. So I want to make sure that I actually give it a title once I've received the download, and I'm going to put it inside of Fantasy Grounds. So this is something that you'll learn as you start using Fantasy Grounds, is that you're going to have to get a little bit more organized once you start adding your own content. So that's, let's see, what do we got here? Downloads, there we go. So where did that go? Sort by date modified, there we go. Okay, so here's the untitled design. So I want to change that. Let's call it Cragmaw Wolves or something like that, with the underscore, so it can, just in case of the file size and the name. And if I right click on this, I can look at the properties of the file and get an idea of how big it is. So it's compressed. Oh yeah, it's really small. It's only 96 kilobytes, which is good for Fantasy Grounds, because you don't really want to keep that file size too crazy. So this is essentially what you want to do with most of the images, except for tokens. You want to leave those as PNG files. But this is the Cragmaw Wolves, so I'll just go ahead and rename it. I'm going to right click on it, hit copy, and then I'm going to go into Fantasy Grounds, and I'm going to essentially make my own artwork to show once they get to this area. So if I go ahead and grab in the library under assets, if I pull this up, you'll come to the assets folders, and we want to click on images because that's where we're going to be working with. And then the data folder here is just for the overall Fantasy Grounds. So I don't want to make this available for all the campaigns, just for this one. So I'm going to open up the folder, which takes me to the back end of Fantasy Grounds. And then I'm going to hit Control V or paste, and that will put this image in here. And to make this more organized, I'm going to make a subfolder, and this is going to be called Handouts. And that's important that you have a little bit of differentiation in Fantasy Grounds so that you know what's what. And I'm actually going to put handout underscore Cragmaw Wolves. That way, when it comes up in Fantasy Grounds, it's a lot more organized. It's, you know, it's set to where it's gonna look nice, and it's not gonna be all jumbled up. So now that I have that in there, the next important step is to refresh the folder assets. And the reason I'm going over this, because a lot of you are going to want to add maps and all kinds of stuff, so this is why we're doing this. So this is kind of the extras beyond what the normal campaign gives you. So now I have a folder called Campaigns. Now this won't show up until you start adding content to your campaign folder. So now when I click on it, there's a subfolder, and then here's the picture itself. So that doesn't look too bad. Here's like a preview before you do anything with it. You can make this your background decal if you want. So if I set background decal, now it's actually used as the background image for this particular scene. You can do that to kind of make your game more exciting or interesting. I don't know if I'd necessarily do it for this one, but there could be a time where you want to do that. And then when you're in your assets folder and you have this image selected, you can click on create image record. So what that's going to do is send this over into the images section of your campaign and in the library, and it will just add it under uncategorized unless you make your own group. So I'm going to make my own group by clicking on this green plus button, which is add category. It always calls it group 1, group 2, group 3 as a default. So I'm just going to call this custom LMOP images. So this way I know this folder is the stuff that I've added to the campaign, and it's not going to pollute all the other stuff and get lost and everything else. Now when I click on create image record, it's going to go over to this section here and become an asset in this campaign. So now it's called Handout Cragmaw Wolves, which is what I wanted. And then over here, once I have the image, I'm going to go ahead and expand it, take a look at it before I share it. So it doesn't look too bad compressed. It's a little fuzzy when you zoom in on it, but the picture itself is large enough to where it shouldn't be too bad unless you really zoom in on it, and then it's not the intent of it. So I right click, zoom to fit. It doesn't look too bad. It's compressed quite a bit. You know, I mean, if you zoom in, yeah, it's going to look blurry, but the type of art it is, it's already kind of blurry anyways. So I don't think it's hurting anything. And I don't see much of that fog down here that I put in the other image, but it is there, kind of giving this little a little bit of effect on there. So if I wanted to emulate that and give this kind of a really cool appearance when I show the players, I can use the image to bring it to life with some effects if I wanted to. And up here where it says unidentified image, I'm going to put hungry wolves or something like that. That way the players aren't going to see this handout part, and it might say something like boss lair or something like their final battle. I don't want that. So I'm going to hit this item identified thing. So I want to first put my pointer on here so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. I always forget to turn that on. But I'm going to point out a couple things so that you can optimize your images and add your own. So just up here, there's an ID button. If I click that, when you share this with your party, they're only going to see this description, not the file name and all that stuff. And then you can lock it and call it good. You can place the window where you want it to pop up on your screen the next time you come into this area. And this way, you know, it's not covering stuff like I had told you before in other episodes, that you don't want this stuff just all over the place, because it's going to, when you open it up again, it's going to actually be in your way. So this is a way to kind of add the images, and then when you share this, this will be like the first thing they see when they go up these stairs, which would be cool. So I wouldn't necessarily put the background image, but I just did that just to show you. And then I'm going to unlock the image. I'm going to add a little bit of movement to this, because sometimes a static image is just a static image or just still. So what I'm going to do is add an effect. So I'm going to go to the line of sight tool in the map tools and go to lighting. And I don't need to put any line of sight on here because it's not really a battle map. But I'm going to go to the effects button. And at the very bottom, I can add an effects layer. So this is just going to add another layer on top of the image. And this layer, I'm going to assign it to mist. So you can see this mist whizzing by here. That's a little fast, so we can slow that down. But essentially, this is where you can kind of make the photos come to life. So I can change the amount, so I can turn down how much, maybe down to 55%. And then the speed, if you go in the center, it stays still. It's not going to move. But if you go to the left or the right a little, like 46, 47 is, a good number, but you got to be able to see it move. So maybe 47. Go any more than that, it looks too fast. So here's 47. Yeah, so you can see it come by a little, and then maybe I'll turn the amount up just a touch. There we go. So this mist is going by, as you're coming up the stairs. And it might even be a little fast for you, but then you can also blur it a little so that kind of blends it in with the photo more. So it's not so drastic. It kind of bleeds into the image more, so it looks like it's more part of the image and not just something laying on top of it. And And that's pretty much all I'm going to do. And I'm going to layer it as mist, or call the layer mist, so that we'll say cave mist. And that way we know what the heck it is. And then once you've done that, you lock these so that they don't accidentally get, changed or move around. So there you go. That's just one way to make this more interesting. You can even go up and make their eyes look like they're moving. Like you can add a water effect. So let me do that. So I'm going to go up to effects again, add another effects layer, and maybe I'll do the ocean one because it makes it look like there's movement, and it's kind of crazy. But I'm going to go ahead and add ocean. So what ocean does is it puts this distortion, these little bubbles and lines here. So I don't want that over the whole image. So I'm going to go ahead and add a mask, which is going to cover everything. And then I'm only going to unveil just the pieces that I want it to come through. So that'll be like on this eyeball here. So if I go to, I'm going to hold down the Alt key and just trace around his eye just to allow that little part to show up. And what that does is it gives the illusion that his eyeball is moving. Let's do that again. Then I'll do it on the other one. Now what that'll do is it'll kind of scary, but players will see that and go, "What the heck?" So let's outline around here holding the Alt key. If you don't hold the Alt key, it's not going to draw freehand. You have to hold down the Alt key to make a non-square image. So there's the eyeballs. And now what I'm going to do is take and lightly, very lightly, turn the blur so that it doesn't look like a stark line where the eyeball meets the head. So this basically, the border here gets blended in more. And now you have this illusion that their eyes are moving. So now we can take it a step further. So I want to make sure that I'll call this eyes. And then I'm going to drag and drop this below the mist because it shouldn't be sitting on top. So that kind of, when you're looking at this picture, it's kind of subtle, but you'll see their eyes moving, which is really crazy. And I'm going to turn down that blur just a little bit more, because it kind of covers up the movement. So I got to be careful with how much blur you put on there, but just a touch to kind of give it a blend into the background picture. And then I'm going to put a color, so maybe a yellowish color or something, and put that behind the eyeball there so it looks more like an eye, or I don't know. You don't have to do that, or you can make it a light or something. But you know what? I actually think that's fine. When you start adding too many effects on a picture, it's kind of not worth it, because you got this huge mask and you're only showing this little area. So you want to be kind of sparing on that. So I think that's good enough. So when I share this image with the players, it's going to look crazy. Like there's mist is going by and the eyeballs are moving on these things. So yeah, it's going to look pretty gruesome. And that's the effect that I want for actually playing. Is I'd like them to see that and to be able to, to tell like what's this is scary. It's got more movement to it. It's not as static. It doesn't have a cheesy, just a picture words. So anyway, so that's one way to kind of enlighten or make your game a little bit funner. And then since this is kind of a custom thing, it's not really part of the module, I'm going to go ahead and link it down to my notes for session 2, because this session 2, I would consider this would probably be part of it. But it could be session 3. It just depends on how long it takes you to get to this point. But I'll just go ahead and instead of making a whole new session, I'm just going to link it down here. So there's my image of the hungry wolves. And then if I wanted to link it to the map, I could certainly do that. So if you had the map up for this, you can add that. So speaking of maps, I'm going to add my own version of the Pragma hideout, because I don't really like the Wizard of the Coast map. There's a lot better maps out there. that were made for this game for virtual tabletop too on top of that. So here's the Hungry Wolves. I'll go ahead and close that for now. Now I'm going to bring in a map that essentially is 1600 by whatever the other dimension is. And I believe the artist said that the dimensions for the squares per pixel is 100. So we'll see what it looks like once it has a grid baked into it. I'm very against that, but I'm going to see if I can make it work and show you the kind of struggles that you're going to face if you don't get a decent photo. So the photo that I grabbed was off of DeviantArt, and I wanted to see what this looked like in Fantasy Grounds. So I'm going to copy this image that I got off the internet, and I put the credits for the artist in the link if you guys want to check out his work. He's done other maps as well as the Cragmaw Keep and the Goblin Blind and all these other things. So I'm going to go and bring up the assets again, and this time I'm going to put it, it's still in the images, so I'm going to go to the campaign folder. I'm going to click on folder at the bottom, and I'm going to make a new folder called maps. And the reason I'm doing that is to keep this content organized. And then I'm going to paste it in here. So I got this huge name here. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this. So I don't want it to, I don't want the file name too long. And then I'm going to put map in front of it. And I don't need encounter. We already know it's an encounter. So I'm just going to put map _, Lost Mine of Phandelver _ Cragmaw _ hideout. So that's a good enough title, I think. That's decent. So when you bring it up in Fantasy Grounds, you'll be able to tell what it is. So I'm going to hit the refresh, and now I have a subfolder that has the maps, and then down on the left here you can see it said folder assets refreshed. So that's how it recalculates, see what you have. And here's the actual image of the map. So I might add this into my campaign instead of using the regular map that they give you. I might use this one. So there's plenty of maps out there. There's several of them. But this is just a quick way to show you how to bring it in. So this is being a pretty good sized map. I'm going to go ahead and put line of sight and all that stuff in there, but I want to make sure that I have the correct folder, and I do. So there's handout _ Cragmaw Wolves. So I'm going to add this or create the image record, and that brings us over where it says map _ whatever it is, that sort of thing. And then what I can do over here is put Goblin Hideout or something like that. So that this way it's not giving away the actual clan name until they know for sure, if they don't already. And that should be good. And then I'll click on the ID button so they don't see the title, and then go ahead and lock it for a sec. Now the key is when you're working on line of sight, you're going to have to make yourself some room. So normally I wouldn't do this in the middle of a game, or with all the talking and explanation, so it would take me a lot less time. But the idea is to get this thing in a workable size so that you can see what you're doing. So view, and then go to zoom to fit, and then I'm going to bring in that a little bit, and then I'm going to stretch it over here to the right so I got some room. There we go. So this is essentially your map that can replace the one that comes with the module. So if I go to session 2 and then I bring up the player map, this is what I want to replace. So without all that other stuff on there, it's pretty close to the original. And I can move these pins to line up onto this map instead. So let's see what this turns out like in Fantasy Grounds, and let's see if it's a better fit. So right now this is the image that comes with, and then I'm going to lock this for now. And then this is the one I want to replace it with. So there are occasions where you want a better map instead of the ones that come with the module. So that's why I'm doing this. I don't want to turn this into a big line of sight video. However, if you're going to add your own content, you're going to have to learn how to do this. So the first things first is to set a grid. It already has a grid on here. I'm going to go with 100 by 100. So if I come over here to the right and go to grid, Right now it's set to 50 by 50. I'm going to add 100 by 100, and that should be the correct size, but as you can see, it's not lined up, and you can see the image here isn't lined up either. So what I'm going to do is actually go to the layer, and I can move this layer or this map if I select it, and I can just bump it up to where it lines up. And in this case, it lined up pretty good. I mean, it's almost right on. I think I might nudge it to the left just a hair. So if that's the case, if you go back to the grid, I can take this little smaller arrow and line it up, and then I'm going to come up just a hair, and that should fix any anomalies that come up. So let me look on the opposite side, see what it looks like over here. Oh yeah, that's perfect. That's what you want to see if you have a grid on it already. And I happen to know that the per inch is 100 pixels. That's important to know that. And you don't want to stretch the image. I found that out a while ago when I was doing a map, that I stretched the image out and it didn't line up. And it was because the program I was using was shrinking it to the canvas size instead of allow it to just keep its own specific canvas size or the dimension. So don't stretch the maps if you can help it, because they're hard to fix and they don't line up if you already have a grid on it. You don't have a grid, you got a lot more flexibility. So this is pretty cool. So another thing I do for myself is I don't want this gray-white line on here. It's kind of hard to see, and I don't really care for the color. So I'm going to go to the tint and just maybe change this to a brighter yellow, and then turn down the opacity so where I can just kind of barely see it. And I want to see a little bit, but I don't want to see it too bright. And there we go. So there's the first step. I always put the grid on first. Now the next step is, what do I want to do here? So I'm going to go to the line of sight tool. I can do all the caverns first, or I can do the terrain, or I can do, either or, but I think I'm going to do the terrain, since that seems to be the most prevalent thing at the moment and what we're going to be using first. So I'm going to go to the Christmas tree looking icon and just go to the line tool, and I'm just going to draw a little bit around these bushes over here, just so they kind of block vision, but they, you can still kind of walk in through them. And this kind of gives you the illusion that, there's trees here and that they're kind of, giving off shadow, if any. And then this is the copse that normally blocks vision anyway. So I'm just going to come over here and treat this as one big piece of terrain. You don't really need it to be perfect either, because essentially you're just kind of tracing around and seeing if this is something that that you use just to block vision. And if you don't like what you've done, you can always go back and adjust. Like I might adjust a couple of these points, but essentially that's all you're doing here, is you're just kind of creating the illusion of these trees here. You notice I didn't go right to the edge, so if you want to make adjustments at this point, you can. So when you're done putting all your terrain in, you can go back to the selection tool. I'm going to actually drag this thing down. I'm going to drag this over and drag this one back a little bit. And then maybe over here, since I've kind of went crazy, I just might kind of select in there. So you don't want to go like all the way up into the edge. So that's kind of what I'm trying to avoid. I kind of want to make it more natural and not so, symmetrical, so to speak. So that's not bad. That's pretty good. It's not too shabby. And if you want to test it, you're going to put your players on here. So I might do that now just to get that out of the way. So I need to go to play mode. And then I can go to my formation tool, or I can just grab the group here, the faction. Put them in here. Here's the formation that I created in the formation tool under the party sheet. So this is the order that they essentially are put on that order tab. And then I'm going to move the goblin up a little, because he's going to be in the lead since he's showing them around. And this is essentially what we had on the other map, except for I don't have the line of sight all set up. But if I turn on the lighting and I have this goblin selected, this is what he sees right now. So yeah, it blocks the lighting a little bit. So that's how you test your work. Now I'm going to temporarily just turn that off because I don't want it to interfere with putting the maps in. So that's just a really cool way to kind of add things in and test them before you actually start playing. And now I'm going to do the other line of sight, which is going to be the cavern system and the walls. So first things first is I'm going to use the line of sight tool and the line tool, and then I want to grab this wall tool, and I'm going to start in this top left corner and hold shift, which is going to let me make a straight line. So there's a straight line, another straight line, and another straight line. And then I'm just going to kind of just lightly click around and not have to actually go right to the edge, because that's not the intent. You're only trying to block movement. You're not trying to outline the terrain. So you don't have to go right up to the center. And as a matter of fact, the less of these points that you can make, the better. Because the more of these that you create, the more data points that you have, the more likely you're going to run into some lag. Because these have to be transferred back and forth between your table and your players all the time, even if you're not using the map. So you got to kind of be careful and pick your battles with how many of these data points you think you're actually going to need. So if you just kind of come out and lightly kind of follow the contour a little, the players will still be able to see the contour of the cave and not just see a black blob, but then they'll also be able to move easier without getting stuck in narrow parts of the cavern. And that's another problem. You might have a very narrow segment where you can't get through it just because you've just simply closed it off with way too much points, or you got too much going on in regards to the line of sight. So you want to take your time and just kind of go around. Like I said, you don't have to be perfect. I'm just kind of manually clicking around the periphery of this. It doesn't have to be perfect. There's nothing saying that, you know, that anything's right or wrong. It's just easier to do if you're not, you know, having to click 50 million times, and then you're just kind of making a rough pass with these, especially in caverns, because they're notorious for clunking down Fantasy Grounds, kind of slowing it down. So you want to try to avoid as many points as you can. I mean, there's a happy medium, I'm sure. It depends on your system, your network, and how many people you have connected, but this is just a suggestion. You can do whatever you want. But some people go right up to the very contour of the cave, and it's really not necessary. I mean, if you got a wall, you're going to be straight linear with it. But when it comes to these caverns, you want to kind of be a little bit looser with them, and that way, if you have a cramped area, your players can get through there. They're not going to get stuck. Then you have to manually go in and move them. That can be annoying. You have to do that more than once. So try to keep your caverns a little bit open around the edges there. So if you have a tight spot, you don't want to go right up to the edge. So here I have this come to the end, and now I'm going to hold down the Alt or the Shift key. Actually, I've already exhausted that option, so I'm just going to come up and let it cross here. Double click, and I'll come back later and clean that up. So that is essentially the majority of it, the outline, so to speak. Now I'm going to come in and get the centerpiece. So again, I don't want to click right in the edge of it. I just want this main part of this, the bulk of it, to be, be blocked from movement. That's all we're trying to do is block movement. We're not trying to recontour the cave. And then here, there's another piece. So let's go in here. So this kind of gives you a little bit more freedom of movement when your players are in these cramped quarters. Because if you are on a square that's halfway on a wall and halfway not, if they move into a smaller area, like a little pit or some sort of ravine or something that's tighter, it's really hard to move, and they can get stuck in it. It's a pain in the butt as a DM to have to go in there and move them out of there all the time. It's just like every time that someone goes through a certain spot, there's like a choke point, and you gotta sit there and mess around with it. That's not fun. And here, this is just a little rock that's kind of blocking that. Anything else I need to worry about? Not really. So that's the majority of the line work there. And then there's a little campsite here, and there's this ledge. What I'm going to do with the ledge is I'm going to make this a terrain area, because they can't, when they walk in here, they can't see on top of it, but if they walk up, you can open it up. So if I go, I meant to do this before, but I'm going to terrain tool, and I'm just going to come around just the edges here. Like I said, you don't have to be perfect. You can just kind of come up through here, kind of follow the line of sight if you need to. But essentially, this is going to be its own level of contour. And you can even make it a window if you want, where they can still see it, but they can't travel through it. But that's good enough for for that layer up here. And then you have an area where there's some water, so we can add water to this. We can add these little campfires. So let's add the water. So the water is essentially just going to be this long, narrow area, and then this little natural cavern here. So what we're going to do is go switch to the effects tool. But before I move on, I want to check the line of sight. So I go to the play mode, and I have my characters and players here. So I'm going to turn on the line of sight for right now. See what it looks like. She doesn't have dark vision. Doric does, so we'll see what this looks like. So when he moves through, yeah, that's pretty good. Like, because you can still see the outline of the caverns, and he shouldn't be able to travel through here. So what I might do is put a door or a window here where they can kind of see here, but they can't go through it. So I might join that. I gotta fix it. 'Cause this is where the chimney is essentially. So what I want to do is go back to line of sight. And I'm going to join these two pieces together with the line tool. Just click here, and then double click here. I got to be in the right tool. So I got to be in the wall tool. So click there and double click there. Yeah, that's good enough. And if you don't like where you clicked it, you can always go back and adjust it. So there we go. So that cuts that off from the rest of the area. And then this is the chimney area. So what I might do is put terrain on here so that when they come in here, this is an actual natural chimney. So what I might do is just kind of do something like this. And if they go in, they can see inside. They can look up into the shaft. They might feel a breeze. So that might indicate that there's something in there. But essentially all I've done is I'm checking the line of sight so that when we're playing, I don't see any problems. So yeah, they shouldn't be able to see into that other room. And this is, yeah, okay. That looks good. Yep, looks right. And then here's the room. Now they can move up there, but they can't see until you open this up. So when you click open, they'll be able to see up here. But until they go up there, I would leave it closed. That's how you'd use that. So that's pretty cool. So there's so far how it's turned out. And you can see there's a little bit of fog of war here because he'd already gone through. And once he goes through these areas, he can see roughly, he has an idea of what's there. You can't see through walls, but he can definitely, he has that memory of what it was. So that's pretty much the line of sight. And then I can go over to and turn it off for right now. And then go over to that corner and fix that. Since I'm pretty much done with the wall tool. So if I click on this and I just single click on these extra points and hit delete, that will get rid of the extra points. That's all you have to do to clean those up. You don't have to worry about them as you go, unless you only have one little image to do. So that helps with that. And now that I have that in place, I'm going to put in the water. So the water is going to be a mask, and I want to go ahead and lock these because I don't want any of that movement on this line of sight layer. So one of these is probably the lines. Let me see if it yeah, so this is the chimney, and the rest of this is the line of sight. So I'm gonna name that so I know what it is, and they're locked too now, so they can't move. But this is gonna be visible to the GM only, and that is essentially what the layers for that. Now I'm gonna go and grab the effects tool, which is down at the bottom, add an effects layer, and then I'm going to go to the effects area and select water. And you can see it's over the whole entire map, which is not the idea. It almost looks like a sea cave at this point. But I'm going to go ahead and turn the mask on, so that covers all of that area with a mask layer. And then I'm only going to reveal the pieces that I want for the actual water. So I'm going to come through here and hold down the Alt key, and I'm just going to trace around the edges, not the fine edges, but just kind of around just the majority of this water. And then I don't necessarily want to cover whatever that is. And then I'm just going to come through here and do something like that. And then if I want to get that extra spot in here, I can do that. So you don't have to do it all in one go. You can actually do a majority of it with the square tool, and then come around and do your final areas with the Alt key, and that will allow for you to grab these edges that are closer to the walls. But you don't want to go right up to the edge of the wall, because it pulls in the wall and it kind of looks messed up, like distorted. And you just want this to look like water. You don't necessarily want this to look like a wavy line or something weird that doesn't make any sense. So that's that. So I might put a little bit of water in here, since there's water running through here. So again, I'm holding down the Alt key, just kind of tracing through the rocks here. And this kind of gives the illusion that the water is running. And now around these falls, so around these rapids here, and then there might be another spot. Yeah, there's another one over here. I'm going to actually put the ocean effect. So this is kind of going above and beyond what's necessary, but I want to put some movement in here. So what I'm going to do is just add another layer when I get done with the water, and we'll kind of make it look like the rapids are moving. But for right now, I just want to get the water done. So you want to try to stay in one tool. I was getting ready to jump over to another tool. I had to tell myself, hold on, finish this first, and then go back and switch over to the different tool. So you want to get all your main work done first, and then switch tools, because then it's going to take a long time to do this if you don't stay organized and you don't have a methodology of creating these kinds of maps. So I'm just kind of going through and revealing which pieces of the map are going to get water. So that's kind of all I'm doing right now. It's just kind of coming through here and only revealing the parts that need to have water. Because if you actually get too close to the wall, it's really noticeable, and it pulls in the image of the wall too. That kind of breaks the illusion there. Kind of makes it look funky. Alright, so that's that. I'm going to come over here. And then in this area, I kind of got to be careful because it's narrow. There's not a lot of room. So I want to just kind of come through the center. And this just gives you the illusion of movement. Well, that's all I'm doing right now is just, just getting the water moving and kind of playing into the illusion of movement with its water. So this might be a shadow. And the music in the background is actually pretty cool. It's got a little water. I don't know if you guys can hear it. I turned it down so it wouldn't be too overwhelming when you're trying to watch this. But I have the Cragmaw hideout Sirenscape map thing going on, or the sound going on. So that's where the audio is coming from. It's a Sirenscape product. And I'm just kind of listening to that as I make this. It kind of helps with the mood. It's nice to have a little mood music when you're doing this. You feel a little bit more artistic. And okay, so that's that. Now what I want to do is add that ocean effect, which will make the waterfalls look like they're moving. All right, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And doing this is probably not necessary because really, I don't know if the players are going to zoom in close enough to see the detail. But I'm going to do it more for the viewers so that you guys can see one of the usages you can do. So for the water, I can blur it so that it's not as crazy on the edges. That way it's not, there's not a distinct line between the water and the walls and stuff. So that helps a lot. And now I'm going to add another effect. So I'm in the effects area. I'm going to add another layer. And this is going to be the ocean. And you can see it covers the whole map, so you don't even need that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Enable Mask, which covers it, or adds a layer so that it doesn't bleed through. And now I'm just going to select the areas that I want to show where this ocean water is. So what I'm going to do is, it's going to be a different effect that runs vertically. The water kind of runs horizontally, so this kind of gives it another direction too. So if I hold the Alt key, I'm just going to kind of slowly trace around this area where I think the waterfall is going to manifest in regards to how it looks and stuff. So that kind of does the trick. I mean, it's okay, I guess. But as you can see, it's pulling in that stuff down here. I don't like that, but I'm going to go ahead and blur it. I turn the distortion down a little. So that helps a little. The speed is fine. Go down to like 10. And then the mask blur tool is really what's going to... Yeah, so that helps with that. So it doesn't look like it's... it's totally messed up. And I'm going to turn the distortion up a little. There you go. So that kind of gives you the illusion that this water is coming down off this wall. And then for the rapids, you can kind of do the same thing. Except for, you might want to put this underneath the water layer. So let me do that now. And let's see what it looks like over here. Yeah, so that effect is under the water instead of on the surface. So that may not be a good... Let me check this. Yeah, it's not really that, you're not able to tell, so I'll go ahead and do that. Put the distorted water under the water so it's not covering the waves. And then I want to take and just kind of put a little bit in here. So again, I'm holding the Alt key and just tracing around the back ends of these rocks, the ones that have drag on it, essentially. I'm taking and, oh, that's the water tool. I want to go to the ocean tool, fix that. So go ahead and hold the Alt key and drag this stuff over. And it kind of gives it that illusion of rapids. So Alt key. And all I'm doing is just going to the river rocks. And the ones that have this foam, just holding down the Alt key and kind of tracing around where the foam is. So it kind of gives it that illusion of movement. And it's so subtle you can't even tell. I mean, it's almost not worth the effort. Turn the blur down a little bit so it's not covering it up so much. Sometimes that blur tool will take away too much. You have to kind of use it sparingly. Because I've used it before and it ends up covering up all your work. So you just want to just barely use it. Yeah, so it just kind of gives another direction, so it looks a little bit more like rapids and a lot less like water flowing over rocks kind of thing. And then there might be a little bit here, but I don't think I need much more than that. I think that's good enough. So it just gives you an idea of what you can do with some of the effects. So this is going to be rapids, and then this is going to be pond and river. So I'm going to do that because I don't want it to get confused if I need to turn or on or off those layers or need to adjust them or anything. So they're named that so that we have a area. And then we can make a folder, and we're going to call this water because this is going to be all the stuff related to the water. So we're going to put the pond, river in there, and we're going to put the rapids in there. And that's going to give you that organization so that you don't have 50,000 things here. And then I'm going to lock it. So this way it doesn't actually get deleted and all that good stuff. So that's just a way to enhance the maps. There's one other step here that I failed to mention, and that's to block out the ambient light if you're going to use ambient light. You need to worry about this more when you have an indoor and an outdoor feature. So once I have most of the map done, I can test this out and all that good stuff, but I want to go into lighting. And if you want to use the ambient lighting, like the sunshine and all that outside, you want to click on ambient lighting. And let's go ahead and put daytime. So I'm going to use the sunlight as the actual effect. And then I'm going to turn on the line of sight just so you can see what it looks like. So this is essentially what this looks like. Let's look with the folk hero. This is someone who doesn't have any sort of lighting. So this is what it looks like. Not too bad. So if they go up here, this is where the dogs are. And then that image that I had earlier where I'd made that handout, I would link that here. Here's a chain right here, a stalagmite. So what I might do is pin the image to that section. So if I bring up part 2, here's my hungry wolves. So I'll just pin it right to that location. And then I'm going to pin the map, actually, to my notes. So I don't have to go looking for that. And then also, I'm going to pin the notes to the map. So that way I have it right there, so I don't have to keep looking for it. And it's going to make it so convenient to run this. You know, it'd be much easier to run this than trying to mess around with digging up everything every time you need something. And go ahead and lock that and close it. And we're almost done here. I mean, I think last step is to block out. So we don't want the ambient light to light up the halls here. Even though there's line of sight, it doesn't block the sunlight or the ambient light from above. So as you can see, it's pretty lit up. So what we need to do is go... First, I have this layer selected just in case. You don't have to, but that's what I suggest. And then we're going to go to the lighting tool. And being that we have already added this sunlight, we're going to add a mask. And then I want to go back and turn this all off for right now. And what I'm going to do with this mask is basically I'm going to unmask just the areas that I'm going to mask the areas that I don't want the sun to go in. So essentially I'm going to go through this whole area in here and put the mask on here. So I need to go back to lighting and the ambient light tool, and we're already starting to get the mask going. And then so we got sunlight. I'm going to get rid of that mask. Now I'm going to add a mask layer, and we're going to hide an area from the actual ambient lighting. So we're going to hide a majority of this map. So I'm going to take and grab just this whole big square segment here, so I don't have to do that all by hand. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here and just kind of mask this off. And now for this uneven area, I'm just going to come in with the Alt key and just kind of trace around this area so that that's not getting affected by the lighting. And I'm going to do the same thing with this stuff here. I don't want that area to get affected by the mask. Okay, So now when I go back to the enable the line of sight and such, it's less likely. See, now we're not going to get that sunlight coming from the outside. I might want to change that a little bit in here because you do want a little bit of light to get in here. So what I'm going to do is go back to the lighting tool, and I want to go back into the ambient lighting, and this time I'm going to go with hide area or reveal area, and this is the mask. So let's see what that looks like if I do that. Nope, that's not what I want. This one. Go back to here. That's the ambient light mask, and I'm in the, oh, I got to be in the ambient light tool, and then reveal area. Okay, so you can go back and adjust that if needed, but what will happen is, like, for instance, this little guy, I guess that's enough. There's a little bit of light there. So this guy, once he goes in there, he can see because he's got dark vision. But this character doesn't, so unless they have a torch, they're not going to see you. That's fine, that works. So that's why you want to mask that off. So if I turn that off, the player preview, I can see this as the GM. I can see everything. And this is kind of a hybrid view of their lighting plus the GM overview. If you turn off line of sight, you're going to see different features. But just as generally speaking, though, when you're working, you want to turn that off so you don't see all that. That's basically it. So this is just adding in those extras. So when the players come to this part in the map, let's simulate that a little bit. So first of all, I'm going to resize this so it's a little bit more manageable and not in the way of everything. And then this, I would right click, go to sharing, and then share the record with the players. And then I would have this image ready, so when they actually go to to investigate the cave, they will have this image pop up. And again, I would right click, share this with them at the moment when needed. And I wouldn't have it in the background here either. And then all the traditional pins that were on there, what I can do is go in here, turn this off for right now again, and repin everything just like it is on the map. So if I go to the, session 2, I can go to the DM map if I want, because that has the pins, and just kind of emulate this. So I can go over here and I can grab this, and I can take these pins essentially and drag them onto the map, so I don't have to worry about relabeling her. So you can repin these. So here's Clark's cave, so I can drag and drop this into this area, so not a big deal. And then I can go up to this pool here and drag and drop this into this area like it is on the map. And then this pin up here where this is the overpass, so grab that and drag that over here. And then you have the goblin den where the underlings sleep. And then there is the kennel where the dogs are. That can be put in there. Here's the goblin blind, so I can drag and drop that over here. And then here's the cave mouth, so drag and drop that over here. So it's really not that bad. I mean, it did take me about an hour to do it. My rule of thumb is if it takes longer than that, it's probably not worth it. But in this case, it's worth it because I'm showing you guys, some steps on how you might incorporate your own content. But this is essentially just a training thing, and so you can get used to using Fantasy Grounds and kind of get more use out of it and replay value. So if you run this adventure 100 times, you're going to get tired of it, and this is a good way to get around that. So you got better things to look at. It's not so generic and predictable and all those things. So let's take a look at the map tool. expanded. So I want to close all this stuff out. Let's take a look at the work that I've done without all this extra crap in the way. I like to see my work before I move on to something else. So in Fantasy Grounds, when you have a map like this and it's all ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the line of sight and all that good stuff. And then I'm going to use this arrow key to expand the map so it actually is sitting on the desktop and you kind of get a better view of what's happening. So this is the notes for it. Close that. So essentially, this is what you have here. So the dwarf could go up here and he says, "Hey, there's some wolves up here," and then you can run that encounter if you want. And then the goblin might be up here, warning them that there's more goblins ahead. And then the folk heroes may be standing back here to provide cover. She hasn't gone in the cave. The human noble is with her. Wizard is on across the river where the dwarves or where the goblins were, and same with the rogue. So they're waiting to hear back from these two. So he says it's pretty dark in here. You might need a light. So the folk hero, I'm going to double click on her token. That brings up her character sheet. Take a look at her inventory and see what does she have for lighting. She has rations, bedroll, torch. So she has torches. So what I'll do is I'll just go to the effects area and grab the torch effect and drag it either to her token or to the combat tracker. Either one works. Now she has a torch. So when I bring her token in here, she can see better. That's cool. All right, so that's essentially it. And then for the dogs, for the werewolf or the wolves, you can just uncheck these since they're on a different map, and then you can just bring these in and essentially add them to this map without too much effort. And then when you close this, these wolves are gonna basically they're just gonna see this token. Yeah, so that's them in a nutshell. Oops, I didn't get that one done right. Okay, so kennel. There's the Kragma hideout wolves. Yeah, so this is pretty cool. So this is a lot of fun when you're able to get to this point, because then you can start getting a little bit more creative. You can make things a little better, a little nicer. So there's the wolves essentially. And then you close that, they disappear, but only temporarily. When you bring up this encounter again, and you hit the down arrow, they start off on the map, they're not visible yet. And when they come up to here, they might hear and smell them, and it's kind of dark in there, and he says, "Hey, I think there are some wolves or dogs in here." And then you can turn on the visibility to go, "Oh, crap." And they start growling and barking and moving closer. They're chained up to this stalagmite thing or whatever. So that's just a way that you can make this game a little bit more interesting and fun and more unique to your needs, and you can help others have fun and not just rely on the same stuff. But anyways, have a good weekend. Happy Friday. We'll talk to you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.